Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. My name is Joe Thomas, and you can learn all about us online at tertiumquids.org, tertiumquids.org. Our next guest has edited a great new book that I would bring it to the beach. It is all about higher education, and as the editors refer to it, our crumbling ivory tower. Unprofitable Schooling is the title of it. Neal McCluskey of the CATO Institute is on with us. Neal, thank you for taking some time. How are you doing this morning, sir?
Oh, I'm fine. How are you?
Excellent. Let me ask you the first question about the crumbling ivory tower, as you put it in the subtitle of the book. Is the issue with higher education, is it driven by higher education, or is it driven by the politicians that have turned it into an easy campaign speech bullet point? We think everyone should have a college education, and that's become like a bullet point. Did it start a long time before this? Tell us how we wind up here with kids who are crippled with, college loan debts for jobs they can't get, and how are we making these choices?
I'd say that the reason the ivory tower is crumbling, or at least it has all sorts of problems on every floor, is that as always, bad things were driven by good intentions, essentially.
Yeah.
So the first problem is, education is good. And the fact that education is good is not a problem. Mm-hmm. But people tend to think, well, because education is good, you can never get enough of it. You can never spend too much on it. But just as food is necessary to survive, you can overeat. You can overeat to the point of death. And we kind of see that in higher education. Well-intentioned, I think, politicians, well-intentioned activists, and well-intentioned members of the public said, look, we know education is good. We need more people to get more education. The way we get more people to get more education is we subsidize it. And so people started by saying, well, we should subsidize public colleges and universities. So you think of your state college university, UVA, for instance, is a great example of this. Virginia Tech, especially once you get into these sort of land-grant colleges, which got sort of federal money. They got federal land, and the proceeds from the use of that land went to establish or to at least fund these land-grant colleges. People said, look, we're going to use that to spread education. And then as we moved on, we get the GI Bill in the 40s. Actually, the GI Bill wasn't mainly intended for education. It was mainly intended to ease a lot of people back in the workforce because there wouldn't be enough jobs right off the bat for them all to go right to work. But so you had the GI Bill, and people said, we kind of like this idea of enabling people to go to college. And then really in the 60s, especially 70s, we get big student aid programs for everybody from the federal government, Pell Grants, student loans. And so the idea was, let's get everybody more education. But what we've ended up doing is detaching people from actually paying for, with their own money, the education that they want and the education they're willing to pay for because they use someone else's money, and that has led to a host of massive problems, only the tip of which are things like student debt surpassing $1 trillion about, 7 or 8 years ago. It's now about $1.5 trillion, surpassing total credit card debt. Those are the things we see, but the rot in the ivory tower is much deeper than that.
Neal, I'm going to play the devil's advocate. So you're going to hear me say this. I don't actually believe it. But the devil's advocate is going to say that if you didn't help poor kids get to college, then you're creating sort of a soft class system where if you're born into a poor family, you never have any chance to make it out of that. Because I hear this from the Bernie Sanders supporters and Free College and Elizabeth Warren, that if we don't subsidize the poor kids, they would stand no chance of ever being anything but poor kids. Debunk that first and foremost, because like you said, it starts with the best intentions.
Right. You've got to, a lot of this is covering the book, so I won't be able to get into all the detail.
Oh, yeah, and I don't want you to give away the book. That's I just want to arm our listeners with some things when they hear this stuff.
Absolutely. So there's some basic statistics that we see about higher education that are really important, which is that higher education heavily skews toward upper-income people, in large part, or at least in part, because they have access to better K-12 schools. There's a whole lot of other stuff that goes on. It goes into who is really ready to do college-level work. Mm-hmm. But what we've ended up doing is massively subsidizing people who don't need the subsidy. And so these numbers will not be exactly right, but if you go back to about 1970, I think it was about 40-some% of people who are from families in the upper income quartile had a bachelor's degree. In the lowest income quartile, so the poorest 1/4 of families, it was about 7 or 8% had a bachelor's degree by the time they were age 25. Today, it's about 58% of people from that upper income quartile, and that lower income quartile is only at 11%. So we've had this massive infusion of subsidies that we've often said is to help low income people. But what we've really done is spurred upper income people to go, especially because if you set up a program that's for truly low income people, so if you think of maybe the original Pell Grants that were supposed to be grants that were really for the lowest income people,
sure,
we've massively expanded who can get those and how much they can get, because once you give something lower income people, middle income people say, well, where's mine? Upper income people say, where's mine? And we give it to all of them. And so we've got this huge subsidy problem. Maybe the intent was to help lower-income people. Those are actually the people we priced out of the system.
And through the unintended consequences, and I see this often, and some of it is driven through courtrooms where precedent is used by somebody who says, well, why did so-and-so get something and I didn't get it? And the government, through its best intentions, has hung itself on its legal petard because, courtrooms will look at precedent and say, well, you gave this subsidy to this group, and civil rights acts and things of that nature can be used and twisted to often go the other direction. Neal McCluskey is on with us from the CATO Institute, one of the editors of a great new book. It's called Unprofitable Schooling, Examining Causes of and Fixes for America's Broken Ivory Tower. It is also part of it the fact that we look at the ivory tower as this only ladder out of whatever issues we may be finding. Oh, if I get a college degree, everything will be great. And we've made it a panacea for economic ills that if you're poor, get a college degree and you'll be well off again. We see the statistics under the banner of lies, damn lies, and statistics. Statistics say that if you get a bachelor's degree, you're going to make this much more money. Well, that's facts, not in evidence, because you don't know what your particular role in that statistic will be. But the statistics say you make $20,000 more a year if you get a college degree, even if you spend $80,000 to get it. That's the kind of stuff I feel like we're twisting ourselves around in this marketing.
Well, I mean, I think one of the biggest problems that we have is it's not even so much about the earnings, although, it's true on average you'll make $1 million more over your lifetime if you have a college degree than if you only have a high school diploma. But you're absolutely right that a lot of that has to do with not the degree, and especially not what you've learned to get the degree, but a lot about the kind of people who already get a degree.
Right.
And we do know that degrees have become more ubiquitous. There's much less learning actually behind the average degree. We've seen literacy drop for people with degrees. We've seen studying time drop in college. But, there is still this premium, so there's some value to the degree, but even bigger than the economic value of having a degree. And again, there's not actually a whole lot of evidence there's a lot of learning going on. But the degree is a basic signal you need often with employers. But it also has sort of a cultural value not so much at this point where we say you must be kind of special if you have a degree. It's there must be something wrong with you if you don't go to college. And we've sort of systematically devalued people who do what we sometimes call vocational work. Mm-hmm. But it's just as valuable as lots of other work. So the plumbers, the electricians, lots of people like that, you don't need to go to college, but you do need a lot of training, you do need a lot of experience. But we've sort of said culturally, well, there must be something wrong with them because they didn't go to college. And we really need to get away from that because college is not just a waste for many people. It can be an albatross if you take out a whole lot of debt and you don't finish college, or you study something that's not in demand.
Yeah, which happens quite frequently. When Thomas Jefferson founded the University of Virginia, one of the things he lists on his tombstone, instead of being president, he may be the only guy who doesn't list being president on his tombstone. But when he founded it, the intention was that in order for this democratic society to survive, we needed to make sure everybody had access to higher education. But I don't know if he meant just degrees or following a track of learning, of intellectual pursuit, of questioning and finding answers and investigating, that was much more what university pursuits were in the 19th century than they are now.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the 19th century, there wasn't a rush or a need to have a degree. Lots of people didn't have a degree. George Washington didn't have a degree. And if I recall my Thomas Jefferson correctly, and I'm not a Jefferson scholar, but I've read some Jefferson, the idea of the University of Virginia was not supposed to be there was a place where people would go to get a piece of paper called a bachelor's degree, which would enable them to get jobs that didn't require any of the stuff that you learned at the University of Virginia. That's actually a lot of what we see in higher ed now.
Right.
He wanted it to be a place where people could go to learn things that they thought would be interesting or valuable, to come and go and take classes and learn stuff, not to be in a 4-year program, increasingly a 6-year program, where you worked to get something called a bachelor's degree, and then you had to get a master's degree or something like that. And college only became sort of this massive credentialing industry, probably starting, you probably wouldn't put it any further back than the 1970s. I think it was around 1970 that it was only 11% of people had a bachelor's degree at all. Now it's about 35% of people, and increasingly it's required for jobs that don't actually haven't changed.
Right.
They just say now you need a credential because, well, everyone has one. If you don't, there's something kind of weird about you.
Right, and it's some way we can say no to you without having to actually decide whether you're going to be good for the job. I'm sorry you don't meet our requirements, so thanks for playing. Neal, let me go beyond just the book then for a second, and I really encourage everyone to go to cato.org and pick up the book. You're the director of the Center for Educational Freedom, and that goes beyond a lot of things. Is part of our issue that we get to when we get to the ivory tower, to the end of our 12 years in elementary school and high school, is one of the issues we have that we're waiting till a kid gets to high school to decide, gee, we better help him with some of his educational challenges or make sure he can, read and do math, instead of spending probably 10% of the amount of money remediating a kid in high school on what they see, do, and get in 1, 2, and 3 grades. I feel like kids, when they get to high school, they've already been kind of sifted through by a system that waits until they're in high school before they try to start helping them with their educational struggles.
Yeah, the absence of school choice is a big problem, and we see a lot of the ramifications of it in the higher education sector. I mean, you can go to the meetings of K through 12 people, go to conferences, summits, and often they'll say, you know what, the job of the community college is to remediate students. And you think that is not supposed to be the job of any college. That was what was supposed to happen in the K through 12 system. And we sort of keep passing the buck, and we say, well, you know what, we didn't get them in K through 12. Oh, well, we'll get them in community colleges. And by the way, please deliver more taxpayer money to community colleges. And we should say no. we need to start addressing problems in the K through 12 level, and it could very well be that there are lots of students in K through 12, in fact, we know this to be the case, who don't want to go to a four-year college to take a liberal arts course to eventually become an engineer or something like that. They want to learn hands-on how to do lots of things, and we've had a K through 12 system that said, no, everybody, the goal should be to go to college, but we're not actually going to work a whole lot with people who aren't ready for college. We're not going to do a whole lot to get their skills and abilities up. But I think even more important, we have sort of marginalized and sometimes eliminated options for students who don't want to go to college, who don't want to do book learning for 16 or 17 or 18 years, who want to learn actual skills, as we used to do a lot with apprenticeships, on-the-job training. We've sort of said, no, we don't have anything for you. There is a movement, at least sort of intellectually among wonks, to get back to sort of honoring what we call vocational work, but we should just call work.
Yeah.
And saying you should have those options, but we have a long way to go, in particular because in many countries, it's not that you get to choose those things, it's you're assigned to those. And people are really worried that kids will essentially be assigned to these sorts of options because someone has decided they can't handle college. We need a system where you choose those options because you don't want college, you want something else.
So, and I don't want to put more on an elementary school teacher's plate because they tend to be the poorest resourced group in the discussion, but I always believed in my parental role was to help my three children as they grew, figure out what it was they were good at, what they felt like they can contribute to the community, and then help them go find the best way to go get compensated for that. And in one case, one's going to college. One case, one went to a technical college. In one case, one didn't go at all. And it's one. They're all genetically the same kids from the same parents, and so each person has a different thing. But the elementary school, along with reading, writing, and arithmetic, should also be kind of trying to help kids figure out what it is they're good at and gifted at so that we know who's got that track for, okay, well, you're a good arguer and you're certainly detail-oriented. Maybe you are a lawyer to be, or you're really good with building things. Maybe you're a mason or a carpenter or a builder of some kind, and figure out where they're going much earlier than we wait.
I think we actually want to go beyond. I mean, certainly we want school choice in K through 12.
Absolutely.
We want to help students to decide what it is they want to do. But I think we also have to recognize some people won't know what they want to do. Some people don't know what they want to do after college, well into their 20s, maybe even their 30s. Some people start doing things in their 30s, they enjoy it for a while, and they get to the 50s and say, I don't want to do this anymore. What we need is an education system to K through whatever that has maximum flexibility for people to be able to, as quickly as possible, get the skills and knowledge they need for whatever it is they decide they want to do at any given time. And what we have instead is a system that's very rigid. It's extremely rigid at the K through 12 level, where we say the taxpayer will pay for a set system of schools that has very little choice. The higher ed system is better. At least we tend to attach the money to students. We tend to give schools autonomy, and you can choose between a community college, a small sort of private liberal arts college, a big comprehensive state university. But we've added a lot of rigidity because we sort of have one funder.
Yeah.
Kind of have two, states, and then if you're a student, the major funder is the federal government. And the federal government has said, okay, we're supplying all this money. We've got to have a way to make sure that what people choose is quote-unquote good.
We
talked about this a lot in the book where they said, okay, so we're going to say you have to go to an accredited college, and we're going to tell the accreditors what they have to ask for, and we've actually made it very hard for new entrants who might say, we're going to give you a badge because you learned a specific thing. For those sorts of schools to get accredited and for that federal money to be able to follow students to those, I shouldn't even say schools anymore, but ways to get skills and abilities and get a signification that you have them. So we have far too much rigidity so that it's not easy for people when they change what they want to do at any age to retool and go do that new thing.
Is that why we see the harder we try to get more rocket scientists, the fewer rocket scientists we actually wind up with, just metaphorically?
Well, I mean, it certainly makes it harder to do a lot of things. I'm not expert in the rocket science profession.
Well,
I do know that we import a lot of people with specific skills from abroad, and we may not, and that may be the right thing to do. It may not be that we want to push everyone to become a rocket scientist or an engineer or something in this country.
Well,
we do get them from abroad, but it's hard to retool to do anything.
But you look at where school choice programs have been so successful on the K-12 before they even get into the ivory tower, and we see that one of the largest growing populations of students at Ivy League colleges are homeschool kids. But here's kids who the state gets to pocket the $10,000 or $12,000 a year they would have spent on it and just keep it for themselves and go home and spend it on some other pork barrel program.
Yeah, well, that's certainly a problem. Now, at least in Virginia, you got a tax credit program that's begun to help people who want something different from the traditional public schools to not pay as big a penalty when they choose something else, because I don't think homeschoolers can get it, but at least if you choose a private school, there's a chance you can get a scholarship that somebody got a tax credit, send their money to scholarships instead of directly to public schools.
But it's still run by the state.
And the really good news is in K through 12, we've actually sort of moved away from an extremely rigid system we had under the No Child Left Behind Act, where basically everything about a school came down to standardized test scores.
Right.
There's still a lot of standardized testing, but in 2015, because of sort of across-the-board disgust with a school system that had been reduced to 2 or 3 standardized test scores, the federal government said, you know what, we're not going to judge every school based on adequate yearly progress on a specific test, because people have started to recognize at the K through 12 level we need a lot more options, because the fact of the matter is all kids are different. And hopefully that continues to be the mindset, and that mindset grows in K through 12, but we also move that to higher education and say it doesn't make sense to say post-secondary education essentially equals a bachelor's degree or more.
Right.
We need lots of options that people can get for all sorts of skills and get them quickly, rather than saying, well, you've got to do a 2 or 4 year program with lots of courses that have nothing to do with what you want to learn.
Neal McCluskey, one of the editors of Unprofitable Schooling, Causes of and Fixes for Americans' Broken Ivory Tower. And I know we spend a little time talking about the substrate underneath the ivory tower of the K-12, but I think they all go together. Neal, thank you so much for joining us. And they can get the book at cato.org, but I'm sure they can also go to Amazon.com and order it as well.
Sure, cato.org or any major bookseller. It's all over the internet from what I've seen.
And controversial, though not in the kind of controversy like a red ball cap is going to get you in trouble for. So I appreciate it. As always, Neal, thank you very much for everything you guys do at the Cato Institute.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on.
And thank you for joining us. Don't forget, next week, Mother's Day weekend special. And, well, I don't know if there's going to be anything special for Mother's Day on the program, but it'll be another great program from the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. tertiumquids.org is where you find us online. For everyone there, and thank you for listening. I'm Joe Thomas. So long, and thanks for all the fish.